What's up, YouTube? It is a beautiful Sunday morning, and I wrote an article that I posted on my blog, blackintellectual.com, last night that I want to talk about right now. It's called Beyond Bitcoin. The cryptocurrency boom opens a door for Black America. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly do I mean by that? Now, of course, we know that Bitcoin has become a major buzzword really over the past year. 2017 was the year that everybody and their mother should have heard about Bitcoin, and if not Bitcoin, then one of the other altcoins, or maybe they heard the buzzword cryptocurrency or decentralized. Like, that's another big one. And the whole purpose of this article is to show that, or explain that, Bitcoin is really kind of just the beginning of a very major, potentially transformative trend within the larger global society, because these cryptocurrencies, they're not national assets, so they can be traded across the globe. So they are literally in some ways like global. The idea, if you see mass adoption, the idea would be that they would function as some sort of global currency. Now, I first began hearing about cryptocurrencies a couple years ago, or really a few years ago, back in 2015. And I conducted some research on it. I kind of dabbled a little bit, downloaded a few wallets, but I didn't really take it that seriously. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't invest as much as I probably should have. And if I had, God only knows what I'd be doing right now. I'd probably be making some sort of documentary or something like that, because that's something of a long-term agenda that I have that I actually want to do, and I'd be able to finance that. But anyway, I don't want to detract too much from the point of this article. This article is really talking about the power of this sector, the power of the cryptocurrency space. You see, cryptocurrencies really aren't just financial assets to trade and collect and, be used as some sort of replacement currency, against the dollar or the euro or whatever currency your national government uses. It goes beyond, cryptocurrencies go beyond that. Cryptocurrencies, when you look specifically at smart contracts, right? And when you look at tokens and token systems. So we go beyond simply talking about a currency itself. Like I said, that can be, bought and sold and traded and things like that, and collected and things like that. We go beyond simply talking about currencies, and we're talking about systems. We're talking about platforms. We're talking about platforms that potentially could become so large that you have multiple tokens, multiple investment assets, if you will, that can be used on one particular platform. And some people ask the question, because you do have people who are critical of the crypto space, and there are legitimate criticism. There are hacks that occur. There's this wild west sentiment and feeling within the industry, because there's just this lack of regulation. And I kind of come somewhere in the middle. Like full-blown decentralization is a wild west, but the idea is that you encode and encrypt within the blockchain defense mechanisms to make it so that hacking and unsavory individuals taking over a system becomes harder if the system is built properly. At least that's the idea. That's the thinking behind the creation of a lot of these blockchains. It's that, the security is just going to be built into the system itself. And that doesn't always happen. That doesn't always work the way that people design it to work. So some people criticize cryptocurrencies because they say, my funds can be exposed, And, you know, a lot of people ask, well, where's the value? What type of value do these currencies actually have? You know, you look at something like the dollar, people say, well, the dollar has this value. And, you know, it's backed by the United States government, it's backed by central banks, it's backed by, essentially, it's backed by the military in many ways. Because if you have a country like Libya, you know, that says, hey, you know, we're going to start our own currency backed by the gold dinar, you know, and you see what happens to countries that decide to do things like that. All of a sudden, you know, people call for regime change. So the dollar isn't just backed by the government itself. The dollar is essentially backed by the military. You know, it has a force behind it. So a lot of people say, well, where's the value in cryptocurrencies? There's no military backing cryptos. There's no military backing Bitcoin. You know, there's no government backing Bitcoin. There's no bank backing Bitcoin. Where's the value in it? Well, the value is in the technology itself. This is what people fail to realize a lot of times. There have been several good articles. I linked to one of them in particular in the article I wrote on Black and Intellectual. But the value in cryptocurrencies comes in their security. So every cryptocurrency is encrypted on the blockchain. The value also can be shown in how, well, if you look at fiat currency, you know, at least in the past, it's not necessarily like this anymore, but in the past, when the dollar used to be backed by gold, that gold had to actually be mined, right? And there's a finite supply of gold in the world. So you have mining in cryptocurrencies. You have you have different ways of mining or acquiring the cryptocurrency itself. You can either buy it outright on an exchange. That's the way most people do it. But then you have miners. You have these people who set up these computers, and these computers aren't really used anymore because computers are kind of low tech, and computers don't really always have the ample amount of power that one would need. So you see people setting up these really expensive GPU rigs. You know, they buy these graphic cards, and a lot of times it's not just one or two of them. They have like a gang of these graphic cards, and they mine with these rigs. And when it comes to Bitcoin has gone past even GPU mining. So they have these things called ASIC miners, which are even more expensive than the GPU rigs. And so, you know, there is a mining process. You know, you'll hear people call it like proof of work, proof of stake. There's all different types of proofs, all different types of ways of acquiring the currency itself. But that is the cryptocurrency equivalent of mining gold that was backed by the US dollar, or mining gold that backed the US dollar. But that's not the only value that cryptocurrencies have. Cryptocurrencies also have value because of their limited supply. This is a major benefit over fiat currency. The thing about fiat currency is that, you know, the Federal Reserve can really just print money willy-nilly whenever it's needed, and this causes inflation. And the thing about cryptocurrencies is that there's a limited supply, there's a max supply that under no circumstances will the supply go above that. And this creates pressure. Like, so when you have a lot of buying and selling going on, when you have a lot of hype, when you have a lot of anticipation, this increases the value of the crypto exponentially, because, you know, there's no fear that more currency will just be flooded into the market. At least in theory. Like, different cryptocurrencies work differently. They have different structures. Some cryptocurrencies are pre-mined, so there is no real mining going on per se, because all of the coins that are ever going to be in existence are already in existence. But so I'm not going to go too much into the minutia of how cryptocurrencies work, because I've been looking into this for a while now. So it's really like the learning curve is kind of steep. Like, and this is what has prevented a lot of people from jumping into this sector and then jumping into this space, because there is a steep learning curve. There's a lot of technical information involved. There's still a lot of a lot of cryptocurrency platforms haven't yet gotten to the point where they're making it simple for people who don't know anything about coding and don't know anything about algorithms and things like that, to where like really your mother and your father, your grandmother and your grandfather, to, the point where they can do it, where they can invest. It's getting to that point, but we're not there yet. There's still a lot of technical jargon that dominates the crypto space that shuts a lot of people out. And I would like to see that change in the near future, but I think that's going to happen. But continuing past the issue of value, okay, I want to talk specifically about smart contracts. I mentioned smart contracts a second ago. I have a video on Black and Intellectual within the article itself that goes into, it's a short video, goes into some detail about smart contracts and what they are, and it's really just like a quick summation of how they work. But I'll tell you specifically for this video what they are. Smart contracts are autonomous, meaning independent. They don't have anyone controlling them. Pre-written forms of protocol that serve as agreements that can be executed without a third party or middleman. Okay, so smart contracts will profoundly impact industries like banking, law, insurance, financial services, real estate, and yes, governance. See, this now goes into the whole point for why I wrote the article in the first place. Anything in the real world that is done where there's two or more people, two more parties making any sort of agreement, right? Where there's any sort of exchange of ideas or exchange of value, anything like that can be written in a smart contract. So this is why it affects so many different industries, because there are tons of industries where two different parties come together and come to some sort of agreement to do something. And if that agreement is met, and if that agreement is satisfied, then you are given, whatever for your services. The wonderful thing about smart contracts that I really like is that they are transparent in their operation and they are immutable in their structure. This means that no one can go behind your back and alter a smart contract that has already been written and agreed upon, because what ends up happening is the smart contract is copied essentially on the blockchain. So a blockchain is basically like a web of ledgers, right? Where every ledger in the chain has the same information and has copies of the same information. So if a smart contract is created, it's not just on one part of the blockchain, it's throughout the entire blockchain. Okay, so in order to change the smart contract, you would need agreement from the entire blockchain, and that's based on how blockchains are built. That's very hard to do. It's theoretically it's not impossible, but it's very hard. Some people might have heard of Ethereum, the cryptocurrency or the crypto platform known as Ethereum. That's the most widely used platform specifically built for the creation of smart contracts. But there are all sorts of crypto platforms that are being created that give developers the ability to use smart contracts. Stellar is one of them. EOS is another one. There are tons of them, honestly, and they're all trying to do things differently than what Ethereum is doing. So they're trying to have Ethereum's or an Ethereum-like system, but better than Ethereum. Because some people might not realize this, but Ethereum has congestion issues. It can't handle that many transactions per second. So if a lot of people are using Ethereum or a lot of people are clogging up the Ethereum blockchain, this slows down confirmation of transactions. So you could potentially have tens of thousands of dollars sitting in limbo waiting for a transaction to be confirmed because the blockchain is congested, because the blockchain wasn't built to handle the amount of activity it's actually seeing. So you have companies, that are coming around now that are developing their own smart contract blockchains that'll be able to do what Ethereum is doing, but they'll be able to do it without as much congestion. And I think that's a good thing. That's advancement in technology. So very quickly, what are some of the benefits of smart contracts? Like I said already, you have autonomy, which is just basically, biased third parties acting as middlemen can be made a thing of the past through inherent independence of the contract itself. So I didn't mention this a second ago when I was talking about value, the value of cryptocurrencies. One of those value, I mentioned security, but I don't think I mentioned privacy, which the two are sort of tied at the hip, but autonomy is an element of that. Autonomy provides security and it provides privacy. Then you have trust. That's another benefit of smart contracts. You can trust that the smart contract is legitimate because it's verified on the blockchain and it's encrypted. So you don't, like I said before, you don't have to worry about the smart contract being altered, because that's very hard to do, and it's not something that somebody can just jump on a computer and just change it. They would basically need a way of taking over the entire system. Then you have redundancy, which I touched on already. You have safety, another benefit of smart contracts. I touched on that already. Speed is one I haven't really touched on that much. Once conditions are met, the smart contract self-execute. It's built and it's written to execute automatically. So you don't need to do it yourself, or you don't need to hire someone to execute the smart contract. It does it immediately, automatically. As soon as conditions are met, whatever the smart contract was built to do, it does. Savings. Smart contracts allow people to save money. Why? Because smart contracts save you money by cutting out expensive and potentially biased middlemen. So you don't have to pay for someone or hire someone to oversee the execution of a contract. You save money by simply creating a smart contract and encoding whatever you want to encode on that smart contract and just letting it do its thing. And most importantly, transparency. I think this is probably, out of all the benefits of smart contracts, I think transparency is probably one of the biggest. If I were to pick out three of the benefits, I would put transparency probably at number one of those three. And this is why smart contracts are so revolutionary, because of the way they're built. They are anti-corruption in nature. So because of all these other things that I mentioned before, the redundancy factor of smart contracts, the speed of smart contracts, the precision of smart contracts, the trust in smart contracts, all of this creates a level of transparency that you don't get in the real world a lot of times. I mean, in the real world, you're kind of just putting your faith in the middleman. You're putting your faith in the people you're doing business with, that they're going to hold their end of the bargain. Whereas with smart contracts, that's not really optional. This actually could have very huge impacts on the voting process. Like I could foresee a future where voting machines become a thing of the past, and you don't have to worry about your vote not being counted properly, because you would have some sort of smart contract that controls the entire thing. Now, of course, the catch to this is if you go the voting route with smart contracts, the catch would be, okay, we want to make sure that smart contract isn't written to do something that it's not supposed to do. So there would have to be a level of trust between the creators of a voting smart contract and the population. There would have to be, and ideally you would do this in an open source type of way. So one of the things that you see with blockchains a lot of times is you can go to a blockchain on GitHub. They put blockchains on GitHub, and you can go right to the blockchain and you can look at it. You can take a look at it. You can verify it. You can see, okay, you can see what it does and what it doesn't do. Now, of course, everybody can't do this. You would need to know how to code. You would need to know what you're looking at. You would need to know how, I'm thinking some level of cryptography knowledge and things like that. So it's not obvious what you will be looking at, but you can still do it. You can still see how a blockchain is built because it's open source. At least a lot of them are open source. Some of them aren't, but most of them are. So if the government created an open source blockchain to further legitimize the voting process in the United States, and they put the smart contract on the internet for everybody to see and for everybody to verify, I would probably go along with that, and that would be better, honestly, than the voting system we have in place today. So this is a real world problem solved that cryptocurrencies and that blockchain technology make available to the public. That's, again, more value. So I want to transition into a discussion about decentralized autonomous organizations known as DAOs. That's how I'm going to pronounce it from here on out. I'm not throughout this whole video, I'm not going to say decentralized autonomous organization. It's too much of a mouthful. But a DAO is now we're getting into the real power of smart contracts. So you have very simple smart contracts where you would have one smart contract that does something very, very easy, very simple, where there's not that much complication involved. So you could have one smart contract that's written to basically coordinate buying and selling, or coordinate the transferring of funds. Like the example I gave earlier, where let's say you have a job where you hire somebody and you want to automatically pay them when the job is complete. And once you agree that the job is complete and the job is to your liking, so the person doing the job signs off on the job and you sign off on the job. And once both parties sign off on the job, the smart contract fires automatically. That's the speed benefit. Automatically fires and transfers however much money you agreed upon when you wrote the smart contract, transfers it from your wallet to the recipient. That's a very simple smart contract. Well, a DAO is a collection of smart contracts. So now we're adding a layer of complexity to the equation. A DAO usually will consist of a stack of smart contracts. So you don't just have one contract doing one thing. You have several smart contracts. It can vary depending on what the DAO actually does. You could have several smart contracts that work in unison to do a variety of different things. And sometimes you will oftentimes see people refer to DAOs as DACs. A DAC being decentralized autonomous corporation, because a DAO you can literally build an entire business, an entire corporate entity on the blockchain. And the way you would be able to do this is by creating a DAO. You would create this decentralized organization where all of the bylaws, all of the rules, all of the things that you want that corporation to do and you want that corporation to represent, you can encrypt that into various smart contracts. Now, like I said, because we're talking about a DAO, when we're talking about a business, we're talking about something that's more complicated and complex. So this is why you would need multiple smart contracts, because you would need a smart contract to do this. You would need a smart contract to do that, aspect of the business. You would need another smart contract, maybe to coordinate, not necessarily hiring, but let's say you wanted to have some sort of accounting features within your business. All businesses need accounting, right? So you could have smart contracts that oversee accounting, but you could have a smart contract that stores information about all of your employees. All of the employees in the company. And I didn't mention this a second ago, but I want to mention it now. Smart contracts primarily do three things. They can either perform calculations, such as calculating interest, for instance. This is where the accounting thing comes into the equation, which is what I mentioned a second ago regarding a DAO. They can store information, such as membership records or anything, like anything that you need, for any purpose you would need to store information, you can store that in a smart contract. And smart contracts can send transactions to other accounts. So such as payments and things like that. So again, if you have a business where you have employees and you want to create a DAO to represent that, not only would you have a way to store information about who's employed, when were they employed, whatever, variety of reasons you would need to store information about your employees. And then you could also have another smart contract in the DAO, or a series of smart contracts in the DAO that handle payments. So, if you have people, who get paid weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, whatever the case may be, you could have smart contracts that automatically send out payment at a specific time. So, like I said, like a DAO is basically a very complex collection of interwoven smart contracts. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what are some of the biggest threats facing the Black community globally? No matter where you look, whether it's in the United States, Europe, South America, the Caribbean, or in Africa, Black people are suffering. Black people are suffering all over the place, all over the world. Okay, you're hard pressed to find any region where you have this huge majority of Black people just doing well for themselves. I mean, certainly you have pockets of successful Black people in most countries. You have some sort of pockets, but there's always an imbalance. And this comes from slavery. This comes from colonialism. It comes from the fact that when a lot of those old systems of oppression were abolished and done away with, corrective action was not really taken by people in the dominant society to fix the damage that's been done. So you had a bunch of people that got a leg up for centuries, and the systems that allowed them to get that leg up were destroyed, like slavery, for instance. But the people who suffered during slavery weren't given extras. They weren't given reparations, basically, is what I'm talking about, which could have balanced out the imbalance that slavery and Jim Crow and colonialism and colonial imperialism in Africa, the imbalances that those systems created, weren't really evened out. So we have to come to grips with the fact that we live in a system built by men many years ago who have no intention of sharing the wealth they created with the very labor they sought to exploit. And this is a very big issue in our community, because you can make the argument that really, honestly, since the end of slavery, it's been one giant struggle against, between Black people, or the Black community and the white community, over access to wealth and access to resources. Where you have a lot of people in the dominant society who don't want to share. Like they don't want to share what they've accumulated over the generations. And this is produced a conundrum, because now you have this thing known as the racial wealth gap. And you also have something else called the value gap, which is what Eddie Glaude Jr. has written about in his book. Highly recommend his book, Democracy in Black. Everybody should read that. But you have these gaps in wealth, and you have these gaps in value, where people in positions of power, it's not in their self-interest to provide reparations and correct the wrongs that have been done. Okay, and we've gone back and forth in terms of how to solve these problems. I support voting. I'm not one of these don't vote people. I don't see the benefit in our community by opting out of the political process, but we've been voting now en masse. We've been voting since the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. And the results from that have been, they've been kind of meh. The results from the past 50 plus years of voting have been kind of iffy. We haven't really, voting alone hasn't done the job that's been needed to close the gap. And actually, as a matter of fact, the racial wealth gap and the value gap is actually widening. It's not shrinking. Okay, so like I said a second ago, we're in a conundrum where we know what needs to be done in terms of fixing the problems, but there's a lack of will within society to actually fix those problems. So what do you do? What the fuck do you do? Like that's the question that has been plaguing the black community for a number of years now. How do you actually fix a system where the majority of people in that system don't want to fix it? You know, what do you do then? What do you do at that point? Do you just keep taking L's? You know, you just keep getting shot and gunned down in the street? Like what do you do? You know, you just keep getting fired from your job when you know your white coworkers are doing the same thing and they're being protected? What do you do? You know, what do you do in the face of systemic racial and systematic racial oppression? And nobody wants to actually fix the problem. Not only do people not want to fix the problem, some people have a difficult time even acknowledging the problem exists. Okay? That's how bad it is. That's how deeply ingrained racism is within the United States. Okay? So DAOs can help solve a major social problem, a major social conundrum. Okay, and this now gets around to the point where the whole point for me writing this article in the first place, I had to lay the groundwork first. So I had to talk about, you know, the value of cryptocurrencies, and I had to talk about, you know, how basically the rough idea of what smart contracts are and how they work. There's a much deeper technical side of smart contracts that I'm not going to go into because that's not really necessary for this video. It's just important to know how they work and what they do. So now we're talking about DAOs, and now we're talking about the ability for DAOs to actually solve problems, solve real problems. So with DAOs, and I'll just reiterate this before I go to the next topic. DAOs are complex smart contracts that can be brought together to create any sort of structure. Most complex structures that I can think of, and I've been thinking about different types of DAOs that could be created. Like I mentioned businesses before, but you could have a DAO for, you know, to act as an arbiter of some sort, in a judicial sort of way. You could have a DAO that controls the currency, you know, so which would basically the DAO would function as a treasury of sorts. And there are actually cryptocurrencies like Dash, for instance, that are already playing around with this, and it's already being done with success by other cryptocurrency platforms. So the stuff that I'm saying now, some of it has actually already been done. Some of it is only theoretical, but it's theoretical only to the extent that no one has really tried to do it yet. Okay, it's not theoretical in the sense that it can't be done, because with smart contracts, like I said, with smart contracts, you can create damn near anything. Okay, well then once you start adding complexity to it and you start getting a bunch of smart contracts together to form these organizations, these blockchain organizations, these DAOs. Okay, now we start getting into the idea of bringing DAOs together, creating DAOs for different things and for different purposes, and DAOs that do different things, and start interconnecting the DAOs to create a decentralized, autonomous government. A DAG, as they're called. That's the acronym used for them. DAGs, in my opinion, are collections. And the way that DAOs are collections of smart contracts or stacks of smart contracts, a DAG is a stack or collection of DAOs. Okay, so you create these DAOs that represent different things in society, different things that would need to be done. Okay, and different things that would need to be organized. Okay, and when you get enough of these DAOs together, you can actually have a hierarchical structure. Okay, where you could literally create a DAO that serves and functions as a government. And in the article I wrote on my blog, underneath the decentralized autonomous government headline, right beneath that I have a sub headline that reads, a decentralized black polity, which basically just means organizational government or community. A decentralized black polity as decentralized reparations. Whoa. Decentralized reparations? Are you just like pulling terms out of your ass, Brian? That's probably what a lot of people are thinking right now. But if you think about it for a second. Reparations, and this kind of just hit me, yesterday when I was writing this article. Reparations, as we understand it today, would have to be centralized. Okay, because it would require a central government to divvy out the resources of the agreement. So the entire process will be centralized. Not only would it be centralized in the sense that the government would have to sign off on it, obviously, but then the government would actually be in a position to decide who got reparations and who didn't. They would be in complete and total control of it. What a DAG would do, because since we're talking about, a virtual, because we're now talking about basically a virtual society, a virtual government, okay, that serves multiple functions. And we already know, because of the value of cryptocurrencies, we already know one of the basic things that we know for a fact a DAG could do that isn't theoretical is that a DAG we could have our own currency, okay, that has value. Because you have tons of cryptos right now that have all kinds of values. You have cryptocurrencies right now trading for like hundreds of dollars that don't do a damn thing. Okay, and not to say that they won't do anything in the future, but they're not doing anything right now, like, that's for sure. But like you could literally own like one of these things and cash out, and if you cashed out on one of them, you might be putting $500 into your bank account. You know what I'm saying? Because the crypto itself might be worth $500 US. So we already know, it's already been proven that we could, with this government, with this virtual government, we could have our own currency. That's probably the easiest thing to do, because that's already been done. So a lot of people probably listening to this and they're wondering, okay, well, what would the point of all of this be? I think personally the better question is, what problems need to be solved in the black community that are not, or perhaps cannot, be solved in the current system? Just think about that for a second. What problems do we face in the black community right now that are not being solved or cannot be solved in the current system? There are many problems. I would say I would narrow it down to these two things. Most of the problems that black people face are either racial or economic. Okay, we used to have social, and there are still like social things, but because of integration and because of the civil rights movement, we're not really held back as much socially anymore as much as we are economically. We're economically held back, and we are politically held back a lot. Even though there are a lot of black politicians, a lot of these black politicians can't really help the community like that because they're told not to. Basically, it's the unwritten policy of benign neglect. Okay, so there are economic problems we face. There are political problems that we face that can be, if not really, I wouldn't go so far as to say solved through the blockchain, but they could definitely be impacted. So the effects of a lot of our real world problems could be lessened if we actually had a virtual government, like a literal, like legit virtual society of our own, with our own currency, with our own laws, with our own anything, with our own organizations. Because as I said a second ago, we could create DAOs within this government. We could literally create businesses on the blockchain. We could literally create DAOs on the blockchain to curate the growth of this government. Okay, so like you could, and some people are like, well, how would that work? I'm gonna go back to Dash for a second. On Dash, there's this thing known as Dash governance. Okay, and with Dash, they actually have a treasury. Okay, and their governance system, you know, you're gonna want to research this yourself. You could spend hours of your day researching the ins and outs of how Dash governance works. But basically, the Dash governance plays a role in their treasury, and a certain percentage of the blocks that are solved on the blockchain, if I'm not mistaken, goes into their treasury. I don't have the exact percentage off the top of my head, but because the value of Dash has increased over the past year, that means the value of their treasury has exploded, and they're able to use the funds in the treasury, the Dash treasury. They're able to use the funds in that treasury to hire people, and they've literally done this. They've hired developers, they've hired programmers to build things on the blockchain to make their society, or to make their platform even bigger. So it grows it out. So it's known as a it's known as a positive feedback loop. When we would have our DAG, when we would have a black DAG, for instance, you would probably need to have multiple positive feedback loops that work within this structure, within this apparatus. But I want to go, before I end this video, because it's been going on for a while now, you guys should really read the article. I'm going to go over four problems that I just came up with off the top of my head when I was writing this article, that I think a black decentralized government, okay, would address and would impact. I'm not saying it would completely get rid of it, okay, so don't put words in my mouth, but it would definitely alleviate the problem. It would make the impact of that problem worse. So let me just go down the list. So the biggest and most obvious problem the formation of a black DAG would address is the issue of racism. You might be wondering, how would having our own government alleviate racism? But just think about how I pitched that question to you. You're asking how having your own government with your own economy, that you can circle that currency around hundreds of times before it leaves the community. You're asking how that would impact racism when that's not something we have currently. Racism, the impact of racism is felt less, in my opinion, when we have resources. Okay, so what a black DAG will basically do is it would be probably potentially one of the best resources we've ever had in this country, because we'd have our own ability. We'd have the ability to effectively print or mine our own currency. That honestly, it wouldn't be very hard for that currency to have more value than the dollar, right? So we'd immediately have a currency ourselves with our own political structure, with our own economic structure, that would have more value than the dollar. And we could use that, we could convert that to fiat currency, and we could use that fiat money in the real world to do things. We could things that we've always wanted to do, but we haven't had the ability to do it because we don't have the resources. So I'm talking about building schools. I'm talking about starting co-ops and starting banks and starting credit unions and starting and you know, getting people into positions of power who actually favor us and actually are going to look out for us. That's stuff we can't easily do now because we don't have the funds, we don't have the resources to do it. A black DAG is like it would be effectively a license to print money. Okay, so you know that could have all sorts of real world impacts. And I do think, you know, we would care less about racism if we had our own shit, even if our own shit was virtual. And when it was on a blockchain, it would still be ours, and it would still have value because we'd give it value. We wouldn't need. Well, I'm gonna get into this in a second when I'm talking about more along the lines of the reparation side of this, because this would serve as effective reparations. But I would like to see the U.S. government provide some level of legitimacy to this. So I might as well just bring it up now and talk about it now. I talked about centralized reparations a second ago. What makes this decentralized reparations is that this will be reparations that we'd create. We will be creating our own reparations, and the thing that we'd be getting from the government, for repayment for damage done, historical damage done, the thing that we'd be getting from the government, all we'd need from the government is support. We wouldn't need the government to do anything else. We wouldn't need the government to build it. We wouldn't need the government to back it financially. We wouldn't need the government to do anything. And the government definitely wouldn't control it, because we control it. It would be ours. So it wouldn't be centralized. It would be completely decentralized amongst the people. The one thing the government would have to do, and this is what makes it reparations, I would like to see this black polity, this black DAG, this black decentralized government given global legitimacy from the U.S. government. That's all they'd have to do. That's it. Just give us democratic legitimacy. That's greater than any form of reparations that anybody has thought of before. When people talk about reparations, they talk about things like, well, let's get some land, reparations can be used to start businesses, and we can get into industry and things like that. And all of that is well and good. But it's, as I said a second ago, we have to take into account that a lot of people in the dominant society do not want to do that because they don't want the competition. They don't want us competing with them. They're not going to give up their power and give it to us. And this is one of the major reasons why reparations isn't even debated, like, really. Not because there's no argument for it. In my opinion, there's no argument against it. But they don't debate it because they don't want to do it. Because they don't have a good argument against it, so they just ignore it. Okay? A decentralized government is not something that anybody would be able to argue against. I mean, I understand that there are technological arguments and there are organizational arguments, right? So the argument against it might be, okay, well, too much of this is theoretical. This has never actually been done before. We don't know how it will work. We don't know how we would protect ourselves against attack. And there are questions that need to be answered. There's still a lot of debate that would need to be had. But the basic rudimentary things that our government does, we could encode on the blockchain using smart contracts. Okay, and the arguments that people use against reparations, that you hear people using against reparations, my ancestors didn't own slaves, dude, so I shouldn't pay reparations. That shouldn't come out of my pocket because my ancestors came from Europe, in 1900, dude. Or what's another argument against reparations? We don't have the money. America, money is not an issue. But technically speaking, like, if we're talking like just pure monetary payout, it would literally cost trillions of dollars to repay black people. So that's why the monetary payout argument, I don't think is very good, because the amount is too high. And honestly, there is no price that you can put on black suffering. Okay, so that's another issue. But that's another counter argument people use. We don't have the money, dude. So with a decentralized autonomous government, with a black DAG, all of those excuses become null and void. Because no money would have to come out of the pocket of white people. They wouldn't be paying for anything. It's decentralized. So they wouldn't be able to use, my ancestors didn't have owned slaves as an excuse. They couldn't use the money argument because, well, this ties into the first one, but they couldn't say, the country doesn't have the money to afford that. Well, the country isn't paying for it. We're building it ourselves. All we're asking for is democratic legitimacy. I think having our own government is in truly being independent and with our own currency, there is no bigger reparation than that, my friend. There's nothing, no amount of land and no amount of black banks and black businesses and black industries surpasses a government and the ability to create your own currency. Okay? So what I would like to see is a black DAG be acknowledged and legitimized in the real world. That would be the only thing I would ask for from the US government. We can do everything else ourselves. Because I'm tired of, and I know I went off on a tangent. I'm going to get into some of the problems that a black DAG would solve. I mentioned racism already, but I'm about to get back to that. But I'm just tired of waiting around for other groups of people to do right by us. And black people, we should be tired of that. We should be sick of that. We should be past that at this point. It should be clear at this point that they don't want to do certain things for us. That they don't. There's to a certain degree. There's certain lines that they just don't want to cross when it comes to doing right by the black population. Not just in America, but globally. Okay, so we need to take the bull by the horns and we need to start building our own stuff. And I'm not just talking about stuff in the real world. I'm actually talking about using the power of the blockchain and using the power of cryptocurrencies and crypto tokens to create our own society. And that's what it's going to be. Now, let me continue this and then I'm going to be done with this video. So I do think that in the long run, this will have a positive impact on racism. So I think and I go into more detail about this in the article. Just read the article itself. The second problem a black DAG would address is the issue of stunted upward mobility and a worsening racial wealth gap. So I mentioned the racial wealth gap earlier. And social mobility, for people who don't know, is the ability for a person, family, or group to elevate themselves into a higher strata in society. So going from the lower class, quote unquote, to the upper class. You know, how the social mobility of a group of people is determined by how easy it is for those people to move up those ladders. Okay? It's obvious when you look at America. For black people, that upward mobility is very difficult. Certainly for some people, it's easier. It's been easier than others. But for the majority of people in the African American community, that upward mobility is damn near non-existent. And this is something I think that's very difficult for a lot of people to come to grips with, because it means that we are effectively locked into the majority of black people are effectively locked into poverty. A number of people have talked about this. Cornel West, Claude Anderson. There have been a number of intellectuals, black intellectuals, who have spoken on this issue, and it's a problem that, again, it's one of those problems that no one really has a good solution to. Well, a black DAG, right? A black DAG immediately erases that. So everyone within a black decentralized government, everyone would be starting off on the same footing. There would be no gap. You know, I mean, in the article, I go into this a little bit. I'm going to have to, in future videos and future articles, sort of flesh out this concept a little bit more, because we would need to decide, okay, well, how would groups of people be organized within this society? You know, would there be some sort of minor social stratification where you did have some like minor different classes of people, or would we try to create a classless society? You know, there are a lot of theoretical questions we'd have to ask. But like I said, this whole thing, this whole technology is still very much in its infancy, and so a lot of this stuff has never actually been created before. Certain aspects of it have been, like a treasury, but other aspects haven't been. So we are in uncharted territory in many ways when it comes to this. So there are some like details about how the society would actually function and how it would be structured and how it would work. But we could easily, I think, create a society where everyone would be equal. And you definitely wouldn't have gaps between rich and poor if you didn't want to have those gaps the way they exist in society today. So everyone would be on an equal footing. Okay, and then the racial wealth gap is a little bit more complicated because you would have the non-existence of the gap itself in the Black Dag. So the Black Dag wouldn't have any sort of racial wealth gap. But then you would have to question, okay, well, how much of an impact would this dag have in the real world? Would the Black Dag, could the government become so large where so many people are participating in it? And there are so many DAOs now within the decentralized government. There are so many decentralized organizations functioning and thriving within the government itself. And there's so much money being circulated that over time, I do think you could see the gap, the racial wealth gap, shrinking. But there would have to be a lot of things that would have to happen first before you would start to see that gap begin to close. Because, you know, I've linked to this article numerous times before on my blog, and I might have talked about it before in previous videos, but I think there's something like a 200-year, 225-year, some extraordinary number. There's some huge 200-year gap between white people and black people in terms of wealth. Meaning that it would take 200 plus years for black people today to reach where white people are in terms of their collective wealth. And this is assuming white people in their wealth don't grow, which is not logical. Obviously, their wealth is growing way faster than our wealth is growing. Okay, well, actually, as a matter of fact, you can make the argument that black people are losing wealth, actually. We are losing wealth. So we're going in the opposite direction in many ways. And they're going in the same direction that they were going in initially. So the gap is actually worsening. The gap is getting wider. So that 200 plus year gap, you know, in 15 years might be 300 years or 320 years. Like there's no way of telling. There's no way of knowing specifically. But we do know that it's getting worse though. So I think anything that's not being done now that could help address this should be on the table. I know some people are probably listening to this and they're like, this is far-fetched. There are too many unknowns. And like, yes, there are a lot of unknowns, but the point is we don't have this. We don't have this right now. So it's better than what we have. And we do know, like I said, we do know that we'd be able to have a currency of value. And that currency would be able to be converted to US dollars and to fiat. Okay, so we'd be accumulating wealth and more money and more wealth that, you know, from this DAG that we weren't getting from an outside source. So that would be more money coming into our community. I don't see how that doesn't hurt anything. That only helps. So like I said, I'm not going to go as far as to say that it would eliminate the racial wealth gap. I'm not going to go that far with it. But I do think that it could help soften the blow. I definitely believe that. So let's continue. The third problem that a Black DAG would address is the lack of organizational unity that has always held back the community since the time of slavery. This is a short benefit. I would say that in order for this to be successful, it would have to involve a good number of black people. So there would have to be some level of organization involved. This wouldn't be a one-man show. This wouldn't be something that I could create. Like, so I have the idea, as far as I'm aware, I'm like the first person to even suggest this. If you guys know of other people who you've heard about who have suggested this, tell me about it, because I want to hear about it. But I don't hear anybody else anywhere suggesting black people do something like this. I might be the first person to throw this idea out there. But as good of an idea as I think this is, we would need everybody, well, not everybody, but we would need a lot of people involved. We would need all hands on deck, because we would need people who will be participants in this society, in this decentralized government. You couldn't have a government. You can't have a government of one person. So I can't create this myself. It would need to involve a large group of people. We would need to get everybody on board. We would need to use social media. It's just a lot. There's just a lot of organization that would have to be done. There's a lot of groundwork that would have to be done, but it's doable. And it would force us to unify. Okay, so that's a benefit. The creation of a Black DAG would literally force Black unity to some extent. And like I said, you're still going to have the sellouts in the community. You're still going to have the Black gatekeepers in society who wouldn't want to see this succeed because they're too in bed with unsavory people in the dominant society. You're going to have those people, but we don't need everybody in the Black community to do this. You don't need all Black people for something like this to be successful. You just need enough Black people on the same page to get something like this off the ground. And then over time, as people begin to see how much money there is and how successful this would be, more and more people, like I said, the positive feedback loop, more and more people would join, and more people would jump on board because they'd see the monetary benefit of it. So the fourth problem is the problem I kind of addressed at first, and I've been speaking on this problem along the way, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it. But the fourth problem a Black DAG would address is the issue of reparations for the descendants of the African diaspora. Okay, so like I said, I talked about this already. I talked about how, this is decentralized reparations and how it's better than centralized reparations, how we actually could get more out of this than we could ever get from centralized reparations. There's more we could get out of a Black decentralized autonomous government, okay, than we could ever get out of a centralized form of reparations. Okay, some people, and like, if people are still stuck on the whole thing about it being virtual, just understand this: you can use the resources that's accumulated from the DAG, and those resources can be used in the real world. So there is a real world benefit. In many ways, there are dual benefits. You have the benefit of the blockchain itself and all of the value of the Black DAG itself. So you'd have that benefit, but then you'd also have the real world benefit as well, because of the amount of resources that the DAG would create, would materialize from the blockchain, could be used in the real world. So like I said, it's a win-win. No one really loses from this, except for racists. Racists would lose a lot from this because they wouldn't want to see something like this get off the ground, because it would actually give Black people a lot more power. So looking towards the future, everyone that's watching this video, I would like to see the concept of decentralized reparations and the formation of a Black decentralized government, a Black DAG, D-A-G, be spread around. I would like to see this idea float around within social media. I would like to see exactly what the community feels about this and what the community thinks about this. Here are like 4 questions, because I'm going to expand on this concept in future videos and future articles on Black and Intellectual. So just follow me on Twitter, follow me on follow the website itself, blackandintellectual.com. Make sure you stay abreast with stuff that's being posted on there, because I want to continue this discussion, and you can actually even comment on the article itself. So just go to the website and leave a comment, under the article, and just answer these 4 questions that I thought about when I was writing the article. But I was like, you know what? I've been writing this article all day now, so I kind of want to end it here and leave these questions for future articles. So here are the questions right here. Number 1, what do you think about the idea of black people forming DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and a DAG, decentralized autonomous government, using blockchain technology? What do you think about the entire idea itself? The whole point of this video and the whole point of the article. Do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? Do you think it's possible? Do you think it's fantasy? Number 2, what do you think the DAG should be called? You know, I didn't go into this in the article because it's honestly one of those things that's not as important as the concept itself. But we would have to name this government. We would have to give it a name. So what should we call it? Number 3, how should this society be structured? This is a multifaceted problem because there's an economic answer to this question, and then there's a social answer to this question. There's also a political answer to this question as well. So it's a very short question, but it can be answered in a variety of different ways. And then number 4, last question. What are some DAOs that would have to be created for a DAG to function properly? Remember, a DAG can be seen as a collection of DAOs. DAOs are stacks of interconnected smart contracts. So basically, what organizations, what entities, would have to be encrypted onto this blockchain to actually have a government? So what are some of the things that a government has to do that we cannot, you can't have a government without this. You can't have a government without X, Y, Z. So one of the things that comes to my mind right away, right off the bat, is employment. Okay, we would have to have some form of employment. I don't want to use the word decentralized because I've already used that a lot. I was about to say decentralized work or decentralized employment, but that's not even, there are even people who in the cryptocurrency space right now who are actually working on things like that, believe it or not. But there would have to actually be some form of participation reward. There would have to be some sort of work involved. Some sort of value, further value where, people aren't just there to be there. You know what I'm saying? They're actually doing something. They're serving a purpose. One of the things you hear about the real world is, one of the things people say, well, why don't you have a job? You talk to people who are unemployed, you're not being productive in society when you're not employed. You're not being productive. You're not actually adding value to the government. That's what people mean when they say that, because when you work, you are being productive in society. You're getting a paycheck and you're working to help businesses thrive, and then you get paid for that, and you use the money that you make from your job to buy things, and that helps the economy, right? So we would need citizens of this government, of this virtual government, this decentralized black government. We would need a way for people in this government, in this society, to be productive. And I haven't yet figured out how to do that. I haven't yet formulated this concept to the degree where I'm like, okay, yeah, we could do it like that. I mean, I have a rough idea, but it needs to be fleshed out further. It's nowhere near finalized. It basically involves creating a token system, but that's another issue for another day. But these are some ideas and some questions to ponder on, and I really want to get feedback from the family. I really want to get feedback from the community. So share this video, share the article, do what you can to get the idea out there so we can start bouncing ideas off of one another. And this is how this is going to start ultimately. It's going to start from an idea, and that idea is going to grow, and it's going to become reality. but only if enough of us believe in the idea itself. And that's the key. That's problem solving number 3 on the list that I read to you a second ago. It's the unity, and it's the organizational factor to be able to even get this off the ground to begin with. So I know it's a lot. I know this is like something out of science fiction, but this is the power of the blockchain. This is why smart contracts are so important, and this is why they open up so many doors. And this is why it's not just about having a cryptocurrency, that can be used to buy and sell things. Like, it's about finding new ways to be disruptive. It's about creating a truly decentralized future. And honestly, I feel like this is where things are going to go. This is the direction we're heading in. You already have cryptocurrency platforms like Aragon. That's the name of one of them, and then you have another one called I think it's called like District 0x. You already have white-owned companies that are trying to do things like this. So this is going to be done. It's a question of whether or not Black people want to truly be free. So that's all I have to say about that in this video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell at the bottom of the video so you get alerted every time I post a new video. And most importantly, join my mailing list on www.blackintellectual.com.